Till today, the Pakistani military chief, by the way, who's been cited just a couple of days back, has refused to condemn the death of the governor because he feels that it could break up his military if he condemns the death of the governor. In fact, just to give you how bad things are, the chap, as it might be here, the local chaplain of that governor house, the mullah, who is in charge of all prayers in the governor house, when on the day of the funeral, refused to read and lead the funeral prayers for the governor. Now, this was a state functionary. This mullah works for the governor house, and he refused to lead the prayers. And that's an interesting indicator. An army chief saying, I'm not going to condemn it because my army is going to break down if I do. Cops being on camera, cops arresting the killer with smiling faces, people sending the killer Valentine cards and flowers on Valentine's Day in a country which condemns the celebration of Valentine's Day, ironically, on the whole, by and large. Interesting trends, contradictory, but sort of trying to some level, I feel that the space for liberal thinking is permanently decreasing. And this is almost irreversible, and I feel that this is not an isolated attempt. In conclusion, secularity, for example, is akin to blaspheming. The Facebook, my YouTube page was just on. Greg was kind enough to play that. Go and read some of the comments. Something interesting is happening. Now, I've been using YouTube for the last 5-6 years, and people have, on the internet, everybody has an opinion, right? We all know this. So, I mean, I keep it open. I don't even like let them. I don't even keep it open to moderation. I just keep it open. Like, you want to say something to my videos, go ahead and say. So something interesting has been happening. Till 4 or 5 years ago, people called me Western, or people called me, too liberal, whatever. But it was more in context of the guests I was interviewing and the subject I was touching. Now they just go ahead and don't stop at calling some, for example, just myself, secular. They say, you secular, pro-American, Western dog. Now, even if I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist or linguist, but it's getting worse. It's getting worse. The discourse is getting worse, and anti-Americanism is equal to being a progressive liberal thinker. Raymond Davis, your man in Pakistan, according to the New Yorker. Your man in Pakistan, Jason Bourne of Lahore, got in a jail cell somewhere without an identity, not being released by the evil Pakistanis, was conducting covert operations on the ground for Pakistan, for the CIA, in conjunction with Pakistani intelligence agencies. Now is caught between a crossfire between two larger forces, but we don't need Raymond Davises. Pakistan does not need Raymond Davises sent by the US. Pakistan does not need drone attacks. I think we're doing a very good job at eating away at ourselves. And lastly, an interesting quote from just a couple of days ago of a big column which is making the rounds. This chap called George Fulton, who was an old colleague of mine. We've worked together on a couple of productions back in TV together. But he's a Brit. He's a Brit who adopted Pakistan as a home almost a decade ago, married a local girl, had a son, speaks the language, lived among the native, went native essentially. Good guy, right? Went native, and just a couple of days back decided to call it quits. And it said, his column was a 2-part series which I recommend you read. It was called George Ka Khuda Hafiz, which means George's goodbye. And it was in English, obviously, but there's a quote here which is worth recalling, that so as I depart, I could go with my reputation tarnished but still largely intact, or I could leave you with some final words of honesty. Well, true love values honesty far more than feel-good legacy, so here goes. Pakistan, you are on a precipice. A wafer-thin sliver is all that stands between you and becoming a failed state. A state that was the culmination of a search for a Muslim space by the wealthy Muslims of northern India has ended up becoming one of the most violent nations on earth, not because Hindus were killing Muslims, but because Muslims were killing Muslims. And finally, that raises 2 or 3 questions for me. As a Pakistani, am I just supposed to be a Muslim even if I don't want to? Number one. Number two, is there any room for, classically, for religion in the state? Because religion was never supposed to be a part of the state in the first place. But somehow religion, in its darkest sense, not in its spiritual sense, but in its darkest, most violent sense, has hijacked Pakistan, has hijacked an entire state with a 500,000-man army, 105 nuclear warheads, and millions of downtrodden poor people, which the rulers of that country unfortunately have a term for: the masses, right? Whoever we can't connect with is the masses. Whoever is starving is the masses. Whoever doesn't speak English is the masses. Whoever doesn't come to, a US university for undergraduate education is the masses. So essentially, is there any room for religion in the state? Also, are all revolutions, we're at a precipice now in the Middle East as well, where there's a struggle between liberators and the perpetrators of the old system. But as far as revolutions are concerned, this was a revolution as well, a mass revolution. Ripped apart the largest country on planet Earth. And that goes on to question that, are revolutions necessarily a good thing? Or do they get hijacked by violent forces as well? And finally, the idea of God, in any sense of the word, take it what you may, the idea of God, can the idea of God overcome tensions which are more closer to Earth? Can they overcome racial and ethnic tensions? And finally, Jinnah's quote, I'm going to end with that he said that there's no power on earth that can undo Pakistan. He said it right around the time Pakistan was being founded. He said no power on earth can undo Pakistan. I think he was right. I think God, in his constructed sense, has undone Pakistan, and last time I checked, God wasn't in or on planet Earth. So Jinnah was absolutely right. God has undone Pakistan in the constructed sense of God. And that goes on to ask the one last question, that is there any space for God in the modern state? Thank you.
Those of you who are in this field or have studied this field, do you get talks like this very often? Questions?
Yeah.
A phenomenon I see is interesting. Sorry, yeah, I can even stand up. Sorry. So a phenomenon I found that's been interesting in India as a comparative case is you have some people who are the poorest of the poor that, for example, have sort of rejected Hindu extremism and said we're embracing leftist secular politics because we're fed up with religious extremism and it's not doing anything for us because we have nothing. So certain people who are in poverty in India have organized in these kinds of parties. And my curiosity is there at all, do you see, or could there be an opening for people who have the least of anything in Pakistan to get to a point where they're so fed up that they say there may be a politics that is non-religious to help them organize because it's not doing anything for them, it's actually robbing them of the little they have? So.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent question. That how have the Indian masses, because the Indians are no better than Pakistanis at calling the underprivileged the masses as well. Another common fallacy between both countries. I think it's a structural argument. I don't think one should take it emotionally. A lot of Pakistanis usually go on and say, "Oh, Pakistanis are they're just downtrodden. They can't rise up and fight. Look at those Indians. At least their villages are organizing. They have village councils, And the Pakistanis are just always going to be downtrodden. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. That's a crass generalization. But I think what I do believe is that structurally, the underprivileged in Pakistan are not in a position to rise, to organize. They are, first of all, they're victims of changing demographics. They are the victims of the very nature of the democratic political party structure in Pakistan. For example, a lot of people who vote aren't necessarily representing the underprivileged. They are representing the interests of the candidate. the way the military has stepped in. Usually, Indian voices of the Indian underprivileged voice has been voiced through elections, right? It started with them voting in the untouchable castes. There's in fact a whole party now. India's largest state is run by a party of, I hate this term, but it's a term, untouchables. This is a political fact. Pakistan is nowhere close because Pakistan's political party structure democratically does not give voice to the underprivileged. So essentially, I don't think that structurally speaking, the Pakistani poor are in a position to rise. Till there is a rethink, either a destruction, a recreation, or a rethinking of the current political party system. Will there be a revolution? Maybe, but not along the lines of the Indian underprivileged, not at all. It'll probably be more violent, but it won't be along the basis of electoral politics. To give you an opinion, which is not mine, a very important industrialist in Pakistan who happens to be a close friend met me for lunch a few days before I came in, and his family ranks in as the second or the third largest legally rich family, worth a few $1 billion. So rich anywhere, right? Like rich by any standard in most countries in the world. So he's having his 3,000 rupee cigar, and I'm having my 5 rupee cigarette, and we're brainstorming, and I'm like, so dude, what's your take? How's things going? He's like, oh well, we're kind of like, he's watching his 3 cell phones and his 5 passports and his 2 watches, and he's like, well, we're predicting race riots. We're predicting food and water riots in 2016, 2017. So I'm like, what's a food and water riot? I'm sorry, what's a food and water riot? Break it down for me. I've never heard that. Like, not in Pakistan's context. He's like, well, Waj, a food and water riot is when people break into your house and do not go for your flat screen and do not rape your wife, but go for your fridge and eat and drink your food and water. That's a food and water riot. I'm like, okay, so what are you doing about it? He's like, well, we're getting into the food and water business. Now, this is Pakistan's industrial elite. They're going to make a business. They're going to make a killing out of that. That disturbs me. That disturbs me.
Why don't we try to get a few more quick Q&A in before we take a break?
Yep. Yeah.
I'll stand. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how these dynamics of developing illiberalism play out among the different strata in Pakistani society, because I was quite depressed and surprised to hear you say this, especially given the developments with the judiciary, the kind of lawyers coming out in the streets, and then also the type of liberalization of the media that you've talked about. So is that the case that that's only opening people's minds in the elite strata or stratum, or might that spread down?
If I gauge your question correctly, you're asking me about the complexities of the liberal elite. Is that right?
Is it only the elite that is liberal and that is affected by changes
Wow,
in the media?
that's a
and
fantastic
the lawyers?
question. We don't really know. We don't really know because, firstly, what we do know is that there's 3 or 4 yardsticks to sort of measure liberal opinion in Pakistan. So let me throw those your way. The Urdu press, print. I know print is dying like theatre is always dying, right? It's just theatre's dying. Now it's like print's dying. Yes, print's dying in Pakistan, but the Urdu press is dying. English print, which can be assumed to be accessed by the more educated upper classes, is actually proliferating. Just last year, unlike most other political economies, ladies and gents of the world, unlike most of the economies period, new newspapers in print are coming out in English, which is a complete contradiction in economic terms with a global recession at our hands. So, on the one hand, the upper class wants more opinion, wants a broader spectrum of opinion, which, if the sociologist in me sort of goes on to think that, so the upper class wants more opinion, that means the upper class is more open to more opinion, that means the upper class is thus more liberal. Right, on that note. And the lower classes actually, which have traditionally accessed Urdu, generally, not always, but generally, print in Urdu is shutting down and being replaced by very, very loud and perhaps even crass broadcast television thing.